call to the honourable member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, there's been a lot said in support of this very important part of our media landscape, the community broadcasting sector, and it's particularly important to me. I started out in community radio as an 18-year-old. I met my husband at community radio many, many years ago. I don't even want to tell you how many years ago that was. But what's more, it also sent me on the path of being a broadcaster, a radio journalist, and was my stepping stone to working for Macqaurie and 2GB when I started out in radio. So I have nothing but praise for the changes that are in this bill to help really strengthen what we have. It's become even more important to have community broadcasting with the lack of diversity that we see in our mainstream broadcasting these days. So I wanted to provide that context for it, and I think that's why it has been disappointing in the last 9 years or so to see the uncertainty that community broadcasters faced under the former government, because there were calls for stability and certainty of funding, and that had not been heeded. So I'm delighted to see support from those opposite about these measures. You know, community broadcasters do an awful lot for their local communities. For us, it's been through bushfires, through floods, through COVID. And they were, for some people, the lifeline and the link to what was happening elsewhere in the local community. And all they got from the former coalition government was just a lot of uncertainty. There were ignores during the pandemic for calls for sustainable funding, and you can imagine the challenges they were under during that period. Instead of granting the usual 4-year top-up funding, for some inexplicable reason, the coalition only gave the sector 2 years of funding, which was due to run out next year. Like a lot of things this government's done, it expires next year. Community broadcasting relies on just over $20 million a year to maintain the existing services and supports. Under the former government, the funding was due to drop to around $17 million over the forward estimates. So our budget commitment will maintain community broadcasting funding so the sector can continue to support their communities with local news, emergency broadcasting and local content, including, of course, Australian music and local music. The Albanese budget of 2022 includes an additional $4 million per year of ongoing funding for the community broadcasting program from 23-24, so it takes that funding program to over $20 million a year. And I note the comments from Joe Curtin, the CEO of the Community Broadcasting Foundation, who said the funding is going to have a positive impact on sector sustainability and the media landscape. The quote is, "The budget acknowledges the essential role community radio plays in increasingly concentrated media environments. This funding will enhance our sector, which serves as one of the only remaining local sources of news and information, particularly in some regional and remote communities," and certainly the case that it's a very, very much needed voice in the Hawkesbury and Blue Mountains in my electorate. I have spent a lot of time working with Community Broadcasting Australia over the last few years because of a circumstance that I'm going to describe that this bill will address. And I was pleased that John Bissett, the CEO of Community Broadcasting Association of Australia, has also welcomed that funding. It's funding certainty for over 350 community broadcasters. So a small amount goes a really long way in community radio. But what we faced in the Hawkesbury is one of the issues that's being addressed in this bill, and that is the issue of temporary licences. Many years ago, back in 2017 or thereabouts, there was a decision made by ACMA to take away a permanent licence and turn it into a temporary licence. And initially we started out with a few different organisations sharing that licence spectrum. We got to the ridiculous situation, though, after a failure of ACMA to really tackle what was going on and work towards a permanent licence. We ended up with 7 temporary licensees. So 7 temporary licensees, that means they got 1 day a week of broadcasting. You know, an impossible situation for them to be in. And it has been a really challenging period of time, and only in the last week has a decision been made to allocate a permanent licence in our area. And I really, that licence has been granted to Pulse FM, and I congratulate them on getting that licence. But I also want to acknowledge the disappointment that the other temporary licensees have. There are now many broadcasters very disappointed that they won't be getting the permanent licence. We've talked about the volunteers. Those volunteers put their heart and soul into community radio, and I want to thank them for what they've done in keeping issues that are important on air, keeping the airwaves alive through a very difficult process over many years. And I look forward to there being a real sense of inclusion, and that those who want to broadcast in the Hawkesbury do get the chance to do that. We have a wealth of radio talent, an absolute wealth of it. And I really hope there are opportunities for all members of the community who'd like to make a contribution through this medium to do it. But what is so pleasing about this legislation is that it does give ACMA the discretion to limit the number of temporary community broadcasting licences that can share a particular frequency. You know, it has always been the policy intent of the Act to enable temporary licensees to share frequencies to assist with the sustainability of the community broadcasting sector and management of the spectrum. But when you get to a position where you're giving 7 different organisations a day, it does not serve your community, nor does it serve those broadcasters. So I welcome this legislation. That's one example of some of the things that it will address. And I look forward to both the Hawkesbury and Blue Mountains having a very vibrant, inclusive community radio sector, because our community needs that voice.